Bishop Elaine, in terms of sort of working out the beginning of her ministry, or what it meant to be a rostered minister in the church, actually began that here in the MNO Synod in the position of youth ministry facilitator and campus chaplain. And then she also worked in the national office in Paul Gare's position, although the position was a bit different at that point in terms of the hats that she wore. But one of the realities is that youth and young adult ministry continues to be a passion of Elaine's. And so glad to introduce you to Bishop Elaine and have her here as we reflect on youth ministry and sustainability.
Thank you. Thank you for having me be among you today. I feel honored by that. I'm excited for that. It's great to see so many bodies in the room, that the church is still has a strong emphasis on youth ministry. I came to the Lutheran Church. I was not a Lutheran beforehand. I was invited to a youth group meeting by my boyfriend at the time. It was kind of weird in some ways. I knew about church. I'd been baptized in the Roman Catholic Church and received my catechism at 7 and did some of that. But it only happened when I had a grandparent who was living with us at the time, and then she would move on to another relative and then come back into our lives back and forth. But whenever she came back in, I was the person that she hauled to church because she'd been there at my baptism and she'd been there at my first communion, etc. But then as a teenager, as a 16-year-old, I really didn't have any connections to the church. And basically I really liked the guy. And I think that's really part of who we are, right? I mean, we young people get involved in things because of their friendships, their personal relationships, their connections to specific people. So it is a relational kind of thing. But I think for me, youth ministry was formational. It was a really strong piece of my formation as a Christian. So the relational thing was really enhanced because the pastor at that time did build relationships with young people. And so I came to a youth meeting, and within 2 weeks he had invited me to go for coffee and have a conversation. And he did that with everybody in the youth group. It wasn't a big group. Well, I shouldn't say that. There were about 40 of us by the time his first year ended. But he had personal conversations with each one of us in that youth group. And some of those questions I can still remember, why did you come? And why did you come to church? And why did you come to youth group? What drew you? What were some things? Why do you need to be with your peers? Why does that matter to you? He was able to use questions that could draw out what my needs were, what my passions were. I think that was really important in our relationship. And then he could honestly say, you know what, you and I we'll do that together. And so will all the other people in this group. And basically by having those one-on-one conversations with us and building relationships with us individually, then he could do it in a covenantal kind of relationship with the whole group. And to this day, I'm amazed that he was able to do that with our group. A number of the people from that group are still leaders in that. We're still leaders in that congregation until it closed last year. And some of us, well, at least 2 of us, went into ministry. Relationship building, relational ministry is still as important today as it was then, and I think you still have to be doing that. And if you're at the synodical level or the diocesan level, then you need to be doing that with each one of your youth leaders. Because I did the same thing when I used that same model when I went into the synod ministry in 1998. I began to meet with each of those youth leaders on an individual basis and say to them, what brought you into youth ministry? Why are you here? What do you feel you can share with your young people? What do you need from me? What do we need to do together? Those kinds of things. So before I even started the programming stuff, which I was fortunate, I started on September the 7th, some of the program was already in place. Because they were in a vacancy, they arranged for some young adults to take over some of those pieces of the youth ministry portfolio. So I didn't have to worry about that I could spend my first 6 months just kind of getting to know people. And then by March I was able to say, okay, so now based on what I've heard from all of you leaders, here's some things that I think we can do together. And so built the program around the relationships and the people that were there. At the same event that Paul was talking about, I used a model, which is typically Lutheran. You give an acronym for something, but I call it the WEFO model, WEFO, Worship, Education, Fellowship, and Outreach. And what I would do then was put it into a quadrant and then invite youth to come forward and put into those quadrants what were the things that they wanted to do in their program for the year. So I didn't develop the program, they developed the program. I just figured out the logistics for that, right? And in the end, there had to be equal amounts in each quadrant so that they could see that those 4 areas were equally important to them and to their faith formation, and it would satisfy the church as well. Because to be honest, we do have to satisfy the church's structures no matter how we like to work on that. The next thing I would do then was go to the leadership and find out what the missional directions were, whatever the strategic plan, and figure out of that plan what could I feed into the program so that, again, I'm satisfying the structures because they are the ones who vision for that program, right? And they want to see what they're doing, that it's connected to young people. So that's kind of what I did with the programming piece. I think another piece that was helpful for me, and maybe I had a little bit of a head start on that, is I was in education before I went into the ministry. And I had this great plan that I was going to teach grades 4 to 6, and it's going to be the perfect group of children to work with. And I got that my first year, but my second year I got grade 8. A bit of a rude awakening going from a grade 4 to a grade 8 level. But one of the first things I did was then I began to read up on the age development stuff on grade 8s. What are the things that, how do they learn? How do they experience life? And I realized that no paperwork was ever going to work with that group. Everything had to be experiential. So then I began to change the way that I was going to teach my class that way, and it became an experiential thing. And I could take that piece and put it into the youth ministry, which I was volunteering with at the time as well. So I had a bit of a head start there. So it has to be experiential, and it has to be them kind of taking ownership of what that program is and what that youth ministry is going to be about. And I think that's what I learned from David Kaiser, who was my first pastor in ministry, was he let us have a part and an ownership in what was going to happen in the ministry. So if he found that we had a passion for a certain thing, then he would say to us, well, then you're going to help plan that particular event, or you're going to read up on some of that and lead us through a piece of that. So he was already mentoring us at 14, 15, 16 years of age. So mentorship was really important to his leadership plan and the way that he worked with us, and I think we still do that. I know that Larry and I try to do that intentionally. When we think about things across the synod, we will often say, well, who's a young adult that could do that? Before we'll go to whoever the former wisdom people were. We will often try to find a young adult who will do that, because if you can't give young adults the opportunity to lead, then how will they know that they're leaders, for one thing? I think that's really important. And second of all, how are you going to build your succession plan, right? That's again another piece of that, which I think is really important. And I think the other thing I learned from David Kaiser's leadership and his work with youth ministry was that everything was about risk and experimentation. But he took risks, and he invited us to change worship, to change all kinds of things in the church, and to experiment on a regular basis. Sometimes we weren't always very good on the theology. I will admit, so like some of the music was pretty bad. It came from the evangelical stuff that was out there, right? But he took that chance of putting it out there into the congregation, and he always used that as the basis of one of his starting points was always about risk and experimentation. We don't know where we're going in the church, but if we don't risk things and experiment, we're not going to go anywhere. And I took those words to heart because I still think that was part of what we did with youth ministry many years ago, and what we're still doing is we're risking and we're experimenting, because really we don't know what we're doing. And if we don't try and fail or succeed, either way, I mean, we still got to do a lot of that. And I think risking new things is really important, and experimenting all the time. Everything is going to be intergenerational. They believe that that's the only way the church is going to be able to go ahead, is to be intergenerational. So what are your connections? Where are your relationships with the other generations in the church, either in the synod or in your congregation? How do you connect those points together?